Okay, good morning, folks. This is one of the first of the OEQ sessions on smart cities. I have with me, my name is Rangraj, and then I have with me Naresh. Naresh runs an architecture development firm and is a very active citizen in Bangalore and a good friend as well. Then I have Partho. He's based in Bangalore. Partho is an economist, does a lot of work on planning for various institutions and is based out of Delhi. And both of them have some pretty great opinions about smart cities. Um, there's another gentleman called Jaijit who is from KPMG and heads the Smart Cities Council, who will be joining us in about 5 to 10 minutes. We'll have him on board, but I'll just do the introduction in the meantime. And we were scheduled to have another participant, Ashwin, but unfortunately he was not well. So let me start up by asking our panelists, starting with Naresh. There's been a lot of talk about smart cities. Maybe they are what we really in the OEQ sessions want to bring out are different perspectives. Some from a technology background, some from a architectural background, from a financial background, etc. In terms of what you believe is smart cities and what in your definition should be what makes cities smart, with a lot of the talk around by the government, etc., about smart cities. So, Naresh, maybe you just want to kickstart by this discussion. You are on mute, so maybe you just want to unmute yourself. Yep, great.
Right.
Go ahead.
So let me just rewind the conversation to where this word smart city, this buzzword, is now caught on to the Indian imagination, at least the bureaucratic and political imagination, if not the corporate imagination as yet. Uh, I think in both the BJP and in the Congress manifestos, there is only one line which is almost exactly the same. I don't know whether you've seen that. So the Congress manifesto says the creation of 100 urban clusters and blah blah blah. And the BJP manifesto also says creation of 100 smart cities or 100. Where they both got the 100 right, I don't know how they both latched onto the word 100. But it sounds like a good number. And it's an unfortunate moniker that instead of saying smart cities, if they had just said sustainable cities, if they just changed the word, then this whole idea of a technocratic fix to the city would have been avoided. While sustainability is a large enough word to accommodate both smartness as well as livability. It's a smart tends to give off ideas which are more technocratic in nature and a sort of technological fix to the city. Well, as that everybody knows that cities are people. In the end, they are not like buildings and they're not hard infrastructure. In the end, it's about the people. And if that focus goes away and there's no point taking having a smartphone app to take a photo of a pothole when the underlying problem is why is there a pothole in the first place. So the debate is now hopefully swinging back to the center now to understand how cities can be sustainable first, sensible next, and probably smart along the way. So I'll just like to stop there.
Great. Most of the smart cities tend to be looking at the technology perspective of lighting and parking and things like that. So it's a great perspective of switching the focus entirely on the livability, sustainability on the people. Partha, may I switch to you to give your perspective, opening perspectives on this subject of smart cities and what you believe, because you wrote an interesting paper on unsmart cities, which you sent to me, but maybe you could highlight some of your thoughts on that.
No, hi. So the fundamental thing on this is to look at smart cities. I think I agree uh, that the whole idea is what is it about the city that actually helps citizens do what they want to
Can't
do.
hear you.
And the this will vary from place to place. I mean, there will be some cities which are focused, like Bangalore, let's say, focused in terms of economic activity on software and garments. There will be other cities which are more manufacturing, other cities which are more services. So there will be a variety of structures, and therefore the notion of how a city needs to be responded and configured would depend on what the people want from it. The fundamental problem in India is that since we don't really have uh, urban governance that allows citizens to decide what the city will do, cities are essentially run by state governments, and therefore this quote unquote political feedback or democratic feedback or engagement with what the city should be like doesn't happen. So in Bangalore, the sort of software industry has tries to push its way into expressing what they think the cities should be doing, but with uh, some success here, some failures there, and things of that sort. So, but the core idea behind the smart city that is a problem to me is there really is no mechanism right now for figuring out what is it that the city should be providing its citizens, because that loop is closed at a completely different level. Um, the second story that, and as I wrote that piece on unsmart cities right at the beginning of the year, in fact, late last year, about roughly the same time as now, about a year ago. And over time, as this concept has become more fleshed out, unfortunately, the apprehensions I was expressing seem to be more and more strengthened. Because if you look at what is happening currently with the smart city initiative that's currently ongoing, you will have a bunch of uh, people who will be involved in sorting out the evaluating the various plans that have been put forward by various cities, and deciding the first 20 or whatever number of them. And if you look at the scorecard that's been put together, the two big the three big uh, areas under which cities are being scored. One is what have they done before, the finances, how did they do under the GMM URM and other things like that. And that I think is about 30 points, 35 points. And then you have um, area-based initiatives. The smart city plan is supposed to provide an area-based initiative and a city-wide initiative. Uh, the area-based initiative gets about 50 or 55 points, and the city-based initiative basically gets like about 15 points. Right? So the focus then obviously has become on this particular area-based initiative, creating something like it could be something like Electronic City, if it's large, or it could be something even smaller like Malia City or things like that. Uh, but you, the focus of the entire story seems to be on that relatively small intervention under presumably the best possible thing I can put on that is that would be the engine of the city, so to speak. And on the other hand, other things that doing a better solid waste collection system, improving the transit services, all of that stuff would only get 15 points. So there is something very odd about the way in which this whole process is being taken forward. That's that.
Great. So the thought process really kind of echoes to a certain degree what Naresh mentioned, which is that the most of the focus is more on infrastructure rather than on the people and the sustainability, and it seems to be more of an indirect outcome rather than the direct focus towards the citizens of a city and make that the centerpiece. Is that kind of your thoughts as well, Partha?
Yeah, I think that is broadly true. And it all flows, I think, as partly a conceptual story privileging technology over broader objectives like sustainability, as Naresh pointed out. And partly is because there is just so little politics in the city. Apart from, Delhi now has become quite a political hotbed, and Bombay has had its Shiv Sena and things like that. But there's very little politics in our cities, and hence there is very little politics of a real kind where people engage with issues, even if it is of the Shiv Sena variety. So that's one of the core. And what I said in the paper at the beginning of the year was it's very difficult for a city to be smart in India because it really doesn't have the ability to do anything. So figuring out whether it's smart or unsmart is very hard because it has no agency. It doesn't take any actions on its own. It's mere puppet, and therefore, as long as that feature remains, it's going any mm, any kind of intervention is going to be basically building a better robot, and then with all the limitations and all the uh, positive elements of that analogy that sort of comes through.
Okay. So Jaijit's joined us, and so Jaijit, what we heard was Naresh and Partha's views in terms of what they felt smart cities ought to be. Maybe we could get your thoughts on this topic in terms of where we are and what we ought to be on this subject.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Unfortunately, I'm in a moving car, and I should not have been on the car. But that's how it is, and you might have some disturbances. So, the way we are looking at smart cities and the way we are implementing smart cities is more of a city transformation rather than being focused on the religion of ICT or technology in that sense. The view that MOUD has taken in terms of smart city is that it has to be technologically enabled and more specifically ICT enabled is what MOUD.
So thanks to the cellular networks, we lost.
And that's
okay.
That's project. Can you hear me now?
Oh, back again. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, so MOUD is looking at smart city as ICT enabled because it has to differentiate between Amrut and Swachh Bharat and the other initiatives and Digital India from smart city, and therefore they have come out with a definition of smart city, which essentially says that it has to be ICT enabled and the plan should leverage money coming from other plans. Now, when we look at smart city, we have to look at it holistically rather than slice and dice it by department and by ministry and from where is funding coming from and so on and so forth. When you look at it holistically, there are issues which are mostly from an Amrut perspective and a Swachh Bharat perspective, which is making sure that lifeline water is coming in, that sewage is being treated, solid waste is being taken out. And if there is ICT needed to make that more efficient and effective, then so be it. But we can't be starting the story from the other way around. We can't be starting the story by saying we need to inject ICT into everything. So in 2013 middle, when this whole conversation on smart cities started off with the new government coming in. It started off by saying that we will have ICT everywhere in a smart city. And then based on the inputs they got from us and others, they slowly changed their views and saying that a smart city is a holistically planned city, or as some people say, a smartly planned city. From there again, their view has gone back into saying that it has to be a purely ICT enabled city is a smart city. So we need to follow that view also, because that's where the money is. But we also have to keep in mind the larger view that cities has to be planned in a outcome based manner. Now, having said that view of a smart city, the next question comes in as where do we start? What we're again seeing is a paralysis in terms of the number of issues being thrown in, or even the ability to prioritize what issue to look at. And that's happening because in most cities that we look at, we know the age-old problem of multiple agencies and authorities looking at those cities, and therefore, if I take a simple example of Wi-Fi enablement, let's say if we look at Wi-Fi enablement of Delhi, because I'm sure all of us are plugged into that conversation. You would need to have a backhaul to the Wi-Fi, which means that wire has to, or fiber has to go through multiple municipalities. There are four municipalities, three of Delhi, one of New Delhi, and then you've got the Delhi Cantonment Board. And the municipalities are controlled by a political party which is not the same party which is at the Delhi government. And therefore, being able to pull a fiber through these municipalities means payments to be done for right of way on which the Delhi government can't do a waiver, and so on and so forth. Now, therefore, that has to be factored in when we start doing prioritization of the projects, and that's not happening. And that's another key issue we need to look at. That what are the issues that's impacting people immediately, that people will have visibility to, and which is implementable, keeping in mind these constraints in place. And there are a zillion constraints in place, and we have to choose which battles to pick up when we're trying to implement a smart city project. So those are my quick views on smart cities as we stand today, and based on the maturity that has come into some of the cities that we're dealing with, and we are only dealing with the larger ones. I'm sure the story with the smaller ones will be quite different from the story with the larger ones. Over to you.
Yep. Thanks, Jaijit. So quick one. It seems to be that quite clearly there is, maybe I'll rephrase it as a question. So do we have the policies and frameworks in place from a political system and a bureaucratic and a commercial and legal and various others associated with it for a city to actually be turned into a smart city? Because there is no head of a city, first and foremost. The mayors or multiple mayors, as the case may be, are figureheads whose term is very short and with no accountability. The de facto head seems to be the chief ministers of every state, who have a lot of other priorities other than the cities. So is there, I think Bangalore kind of sort of started up saying there's now a minister who is going to be in charge of the city. But is there, given what Jaijit also mentioned, that there's so many different siloed bodies that report to different people, some central, some state, and all that, how do we cut through this? Or is there a possibility of cutting through these layers of bureaucracy and, to actually get to this?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. A good question. Let me just look at the first part. A long question and all pertinent points put in. So in terms of policies, we have worked out the smart city policy for government of Gujarat. It can be further fine-tuned, but some kind of a policy template now exists based on what we did for Gujarat. I think there needs to be another view to these policies in terms of, in terms of how we should be procuring and so on. I'm of the view that we should be saying that they should prefer Indian firms and Indian IPR and so on, for procurement perspective, and then have some kind of a policy in terms of innovation procurement and so on and so forth, and focusing on startups and SMEs. So I think that kind of a policy also needs to be put into place. That's not there. And the reason is very simple, because our city will be evolving in a different way. We need to have our local vendors who are strong enough to support us as we evolve. We can't be a recipient of technologies being created elsewhere. And even if we need to do that, there has to be a strong presence here to be able to fine tune all of that. Let me take a small example of what I'm talking about. I don't believe any of these surveillance projects will survive more than 2 to 3 years, the surveillance cameras project, because the wires will get cut. One single wire cut, you would not know which wire is getting connected to which camera and what has got cut. And over a period of time, the entire infrastructure will deteriorate, and that will happen very, very fast. And therefore, a simple solution would be to have wireless cameras in place with whatever technology that needs to be put into place needs to be put into place. And we can't be waiting for others to develop it based on their requirements in either Japan or US or wherever. This has been a standard refrain for a long time, but I think the larger policy perspectives are now in place to kind of implement this policy at a city level. Having said that, the second set of questions that you asked are going to be extremely complex, and therefore one of the views we need to take is, should we wait for all before we start implementing, or shall we start implementing in parallel? So that's it, and my view is that we should be executing in parallel, getting the quick wins in place, which has an implication on the people, while resolving the larger issues of of who's controlling the city. And it's not the chief minister who's controlling the city, it is not the city mayor who's controlling the city. A quick example in terms of command and control: most of the cities we're looking at are having at least 3 command and control. One from the municipality, one from the police, and one from the fire department. It just does not make sense. We're duplicating even within the city. So those issues needs to be resolved, but we can't stop for those issues to be resolved.
Can I chip in here?
Hi. Can I jump in for a couple of minutes? Yeah. Am I audible?
Hello. Hello. I think
Yeah, Partho, go ahead.
Yes. A couple of quick things to what Jaijit was saying. And so let us say, one, what we have is a situation, as you mentioned, about the tele. What worries me is about, let's say, the wireless cameras versus wired cameras. To me, if we are unable to get to a situation, if we continue to be in a situation where wires are going to go missing, my worry is the governance of that city and the security of that city doesn't bode very well for the overall project. So a tech fix like getting a wireless camera may not suffice, because there is something much more fundamentally problematic that's happening in that city. People are essentially going around stealing wires. That said, there is also one other kind of issue that perhaps one needs to focus on. Two issues that quickly focus on. One is the fact that in terms of stuff that's going to be used for doing this, there are two broad varieties. One is where there are centralized systems and stuff gets fed in somewhere and your control room kind of thing. And the other is what sort of is beginning to happen in Delhi. GIMS has been pushing some of that stuff forward, where you provide a lot more information to people. So and I think Ashwin does some of that out in Bangalore, pushing out information like bus schedules, where the next bus is, etc. Stuff that you can track more or less on your phone and smartphones and things like that, and then let people take decisions based on that higher level of information. Which so now, I mean, Delhi seems to be putting together stuff which says, when is the next water tanker coming in, and how crowded is the bus that's following this, and how far behind is it, so you can take a decision whether you want to get onto this bus or wait for the next one, and things like that. So a combination of pushing more information to the citizen and allowing that person to make up his or her mind might be one an approach that I don't yet see being talked about too much in the system. And finally, I was in Madrid recently and speaking to the people who were working on Madrid Inteligente, which is the IBM's sort of flagship project there. And what I understand is IBM's planning to push a lot of the tools that they're building on these stuff out in the cloud, and let the cities sort of use them on a, just like what we have with a variety of other softwares coming up, pay-per-use kind of basis. I'm sure other firms will do similar kinds of stuff. And so then a lot of the issues will be how capable are cities to sort of make these kinds of choices and pick and choose what menus are coming their way, as sort of curating and helping cities to work through these kinds of stuff. That capacity I just don't see in any first cities at this point in time. So I'm not very sure where we'll be going with that space. But it's sort of depending on how even in the technological space, depending on how the technology evolves, the kind of capacity that will be needed in the cities to take best advantage of it might actually come through. Actually, thanks.
So I think a lot of it was still technology related. My point is that the politicians are governed by a 5-year window to get re-elected. Naresh, so is it short-term thinking which is specific? So a lot of this discussion was more technology oriented. A lot of the politicians are very much a 5-year window cycle of how to, crudely put it, get enough return of investment so that they can live happily ever after. Is there somebody who's really looking at it from a sustainability long-term perspective, and what really is and opening up more and more information from the public sector is detrimental to that transparency and the graft and a lot of it. So what do you see, Naresh, is the way things are going in terms of governance, openness, and transparency and things like that, having worked with the government in Bangalore?
Yeah, I will try to bring a slightly different, this smart city conversation, as I pointed out in the beginning, is excessively focused on ICT as some kind of great enabling tool to make it happen. And everybody could be more wrong about this than and funnily enough, the answers to this sometimes, and my obsession with the past, right? So I'm also a big batter for the heritage value of Indian cities. Curiously, the framework for town planning in India actually is not as recent. Many people think town planning came to India after Chandigarh was made or something, as though there were no cities in India before Chandigarh. Right? And many of the cities in India, including Bangalore, have had actually very well planned neighborhoods and city extensions. I think you know one of them very well, which is Baswamgudi, right? Which is done in the latter half of the 19th century. It is planned in the 1894 or something like that. And then what happens is in the early part of the 20th century, around the 1910, 1914, there's an extraordinary guy called Patrick Geddes who came to India. He qualifies, in my opinion, for students of colonial studies and post-colonial studies, as one of these Britishers, Scotsmen actually, who came to India and did an extraordinary report on 50 Indian cities called Cities in Evolution in 1915, which is quite long ago, 1915, right? And in which he was also responsible for something called the Bombay Town Planning Act, which was passed by, which was actually became law in 1917, which lays out exactly how to do an Indian city or an extension to an Indian city. How do you grow an Indian city? The Town Planning Act is so robustly written that it has been challenged, I think, 40 to 50 times in every possible court in India, including the Supreme Court, and the law has won every single time. It is the foundation, as you know, that housing and planning are also state subjects, and each state has its own town planning acts and rules, which is actually a huge mess because there are 29 states, I think, now, and there are that many variations of the act with little changes to each state, so that it becomes very difficult to figure it out. But the core of the act still draws from that Bombay Town Planning Act, but nobody implements it. There is no, unfortunately, I think when the act was made, there was not a enforcement mechanism built into that whole sequence. It was assumed that it is so sensible that people would do it, but nobody does it. Patrick Geddes also writes around that time in one of his books, saying that India is too complex to be seen from a single lens of perception. And he says that what is needed to make a city or make a town or make a city livable and habitable and sustainable in a vitalist sort of sense is something called Nagara Yoga. Just like you have Raja Yoga where politicians are supposed to rule, or regular yoga in which you and me are supposed to look after ourselves. We have to do something called Nagara Yoga, which is a holistic understanding of how cities can exist in union and in an inclusive way, so that it does not become a compounds of rich gated communities which are insulated from the overall infrastructure by providing their own infrastructure, but in some sense integrated in such a way that all classes of people and all kinds of people are able to live in a place with, in some sense, a utopia, which is not spelled utopia, but it's spelled e-utopia. EU, the root means good in Greek. That utopia is a good place, as opposed to something called utopia, which is O-U-T-O-P-I-A, which means no place. No, it means nowhere. So what is the point in creating all these technological fixes when the fundamental problems, like Partho pointed out and Jaijit pointed out, of governance and governance structures and policy structures, for which there is already a framework in place, you don't need to reinvent it from the wheel, are now being ignored in favor of a technocratic approach to the whole situation. Something is going wrong. Two, the discipline of planning is like the old about the king. The planning is dead. Long live planning kind of problem has come now. Nobody knows what to exactly do, because planning by sectoral models or by looking at land use patterns are all completely passé. Because we are seeing what is happening in Bangalore because of economics. Right? The economic growth of the city is what is making the city. The city is not made by architects or urban designers or bureaucrats. It's rather made by transport engineers, real estate agents, or real estate developers, as the case may be, and other vested interests. The city, the expansion of a city or the growth of a city or the development of a city is not decided by people who are from the city. The politicians who rule the city, like most chief ministers of states in India, are not from the city, which is the capital. So their focus is never that. Their focus is always where they came from or the hinterland. So there has to be a separation in some sense of city and state. I think that's the big step India can take now, saying that cities should be governed as semi-autonomous regions, as with a separate governance structure, which just reports back to a political establishment which looks after the larger state. But on the flip side, that will never happen, because the source of 80% of all revenue of Karnataka comes from Bangalore. So to ask the chief minister of the state saying let it go to a local politician will only encourage the rise of a rival within the own party of another politician who will eventually challenge the status quo of the chief, the larger authorities in power. How are we going to ever get beyond this one stumbling block, which the chief ministers of states have no incentives? If you look at other countries, for instance, in Brazil, the chief minister of, mayor of a city like many cities there has gone on to become the prime minister of the country itself. So, becoming the mayor of a city is an extraordinarily political mayor or the CEO, whatever you want to call that thing, is a Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York, then he wanted to stand for president of the United States. I mean, this is a very common thing that is repeating all over the world. And in India, the politicians who are the higher order of things are simply not letting this happen. Unless this city-state, see, one of the reasons why the NCR, though it has horrible pollution, but it has reasonable infrastructure, is because it's governed as the larger interests of the NCR is governed by the NCR. I mean, there's an authority which looks after it and pushes a lot of money into making the NCR work. Maybe it's time to think of SCRs, state capital regions, just like the NCR, as a new idea to look at least these large urban clusters as separate problems to be solved, disconnected from the old overall politics of the state itself.
Jaijit, you missed some parts of it, but Partho, do you have any thoughts based on what Naresh mentioned?
I hear what Naresh is saying, but I'm not very sure we can build a solution that avoids the politics. There's a reason why we have not been able to insulate our cities from the state. There's been talk ever since independence of Bombay being made into a union territory, which obviously didn't work out. And similarly, Bangalore, as you mentioned, is really quite a large example of providing a large economic base to the state of Karnataka. But I'm not sure what kind of political settlement will lead to a situation where the states can be persuaded to let go of their cities. In my most optimistic moments, I sort of think that maybe if states were given a trade-off which said you keep the capital city and turn it into a sort of state territory and let the other cities in your state go, maybe that's a bargain that can be struck in return for extra funds for the state capital or whatever. But that is really, to my mind, a little bit of dating. On the flip side, I think the longer processes that are currently at work means that in places like Tamil Nadu, in places like Maharashtra, there are already shifts in place that make the urban electorate more salient as part of the process. It's also important for politicians to not kill the golden rule, and therefore while they want to extract rents from the cities, they need to make sure that the cities have a certain degree of functionality, otherwise those rents will stop happening. There are also situations like in Andhra Pradesh where Mr. Naidu is sort of has a singular focus on urban development. He had that focus back when he tried it, but Hyderabad burnt his fingers, and more than his fingers, because there was a little bit of a backlash. In the new Andhra Pradesh, he seems to have learned that lesson and is going a little more even-handed. His rhetoric is slightly different. So there will be, as we become more and more urban, and as the urban becomes more relevant to more people, as has already begun to happen in many states of India, I think you will see a shift in this equilibrium as it goes forward. The other thing that is also happening is also at some point in time, the reason why other places these mayors become important, etc., is because local leaders matter to party. In most of in the Congress for a long time, local leaders had ceased to matter. The BJP had a situation where the local leaders were mattering, but now, since the last election, it seems to be becoming even more Congress-like in central top-down kind of story. So the other problem is that our political parties are not built ground up, and that until that happens, again, the importance of local political leadership will be an issue. That's one. But the other thing I would like to point out is, as Naresh says, there is definitely the old-fashioned land use planning approach to urban planning has really not in fashion anywhere anymore, not followed at all anywhere anymore. But it's still basically the stuff that drives the way our town and country planning organizations do the job. It's basically the way our development plans are put in place by the various development authorities, whether it is Bombay, whether it is Bangalore, Delhi being the most egregious example. So there is some value in a discourse and pushing back on the fact that when people say planning don't work, it's also the case that the way we plan currently is really outmoded and therefore needs to be relooked at thoroughly. I think within the planning schools you do have that understanding, but it somehow still hasn't percolated down to where it's actually being done, which is the various development authorities and town planning organizations.
Okay. Now, just switching to one other topic, which is that the way smart cities seem to be going about it is that there is consultants that are hired, then vendors that are brought in, and then funding that's provided invariably by a central body, and then looked at it from that perspective. Shouldn't there be a more democratic way of going about this rather than a very top-down, single vendor, single kind of an approach, whereas a more participative, democratic way that we see that in iSpirit by opening up this open data and open APIs have now opened up this kind of democratic approach that anybody can then come up with their innovation of how to solve problems. Now, if you take that same parallel and apply it to cities, is there an open API or an open standard, an open mechanism that cities can kind of open up, which says that now an NGO, a startup, open global and ULB, anyone can make their lives easier because basically the structure of having this bandwidth between quote unquote the government, which is always supposed to do something, and since we have paid the tax, we don't need to do anything, versus a lot more let's help ourselves because obviously we can't do it all, the government can't do it all, so let's take things in a more participatory manner. So any thoughts on that, Jaijit?
We have seen the first part of the participatory thing that happened during the planning for the smart cities. Um, if we take off the romantic part of it, it didn't work. Frankly, it didn't work. I don't know what the experience of others would be. So just one point of reference may not be the correct reference, but what we experienced is that it did not work. And I can give you multiple examples on why it did not work. Let me take just one example. Pedestrianization is something that's people's views. They will say, let's have pedestrianization, and that's the view of the majority because it sounds very romantic. When you come down to the brass tacks, there are shops whose livelihood depends on fast-moving cars bringing in their clientele and them being able to service it. Now, this set of people will be very small, but should we let the tyranny of the majority overrule the requirement of these business people who are part of the community in a city? And one can still say that, well, we'll relocate them and so on and so forth. In real life, it doesn't work. The business will be completely demolished and devastated if we relocate them. You can't have people who will pay 40,000 rupees for a suit to be sued up to come and park their car and take a park and ride from the parking lot in a bus, and then getting down and getting their suit measured and so on and so forth. It doesn't work in real life. But when we go through just one second, रास्ता मालूम है? When we go through a democratic process, all kinds of things are thrown at us. Let me take another example. Dogs, monkeys, feeding of pigeons is a big menace in Delhi. Even a single SMS being sent out asking for
We lost Jaijit, his audio. Probably dropped off. So, Naresh, any thoughts before I switch to Partho?
Yeah. So, no, if you start saying that every single minority opinion in a city has to be considered before any action is taken, you will get into analysis.
creates.
Sorry, Jaijit, we lost you, so I'm just switching to Naresh, and then we'll get back to you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just have to get off the call now. I need to get into a meeting. So, with your permission, if I could get off the call, and I'll look forward to the next call if that's okay with you.
Thanks,
Jaijit, why don't you finish your thought on the monkeys of Delhi and then
Yeah, so the quick answer was that I don't believe that we are at a level where we can have participation from citizens because there is enough that needs to be done right now where we don't really need to go through a participative phase, because the participative phase is very confusing. The citizens needs to be enabled and contributing in a constructive manner.
Thanks.
And that might sound counter to all the other philosophies, but I just laid my thoughts out there.
Thanks. Maybe I should clarify. So thanks, Jaijit. I think we'll let you go, and then we'll look forward to the next one.
Sure.
Thanks. Let me clarify what I meant by participatory. What I did not want to come across as ask everybody's opinion before you take a decision, but more from a perspective of if there is the opendata.gov in the US, EU has opened up an open API for cities across all of EU, which therefore allows a greater level of leveraging some of the services and data that is, of course, held by the government on behalf of people on a need-to-know basis. But what I really meant was participatory nature from that perspective, that once you have these kind of open APIs for cities, just as, India Stack and various others that are being made by the government, it be done at the city level, which then says, okay, now I am now wanting to solve the problem for Kormangla, so let me, as a startup, go ahead, leverage some of the services and make life easier for Kormangla people, because that's what I am good at. Well, I know the issues and let me solve it. Similarly, an NGO or things like that. So it was not from a decision-making perspective, but more from an innovation of how to solve city problems. Can we then really look at it from a participatory one rather than a single vendor approach of a top-down one? So maybe Naresh, you want to take a shot at it?
So I see that. I mean, this is precisely what a lot of us are troubled about. This whole big brother attitude of government, that citizens are not capable of planning that. So the debate has to move from cities for the people to cities by the people. Right? Otherwise, there is never going to be an open innovation, and there's no point saying inclusive, and then we don't want to listen to anybody else in the same breath. We can't be really doing that. So what happens is that a problem like what Jaijit brought about earlier, saying if some 10 shops out of 500 need a car to come there, probably it's easier to relocate them than mess up the life of 475 other people. So I don't agree with that thing that you have to listen to everybody for everything. There is a democracy in some sense, in some definition, is actually ruled by the majority, and also the rights of the individual. They are not compromisable with each other. But this big brother attitude of government and government agencies not to part with data. For instance, I don't know how many of you know that 15 years ago we were involved in that BATF, and we got a map of Bangalore done to fairly high quality standards. We got a map of the city and also a lot of layers of data about the city. Today, the master planning, they have never let it to the public, however much we try to tell the government that why don't you set up a spatial observatory, let it be an open data platform, people should contribute, people should be able to take out data from that and create businesses out of it, or at least even NGOs to create solutions. Resident welfare associations should be able to plan their area better. Almost no, I do not understand why that in most major cities of the world, including most major cities in China, have a planning center in the center of every city, in which there is a model of the city, there is information about the city, and whatever data you want. And you would think China being a totalitarian state, you will not get any information. We are doing some projects in China. The quality of urban information available to you is as good as any other Western city. What is it that government is afraid of? The data getting into the wrong hands? It will get into the wrong hands through Google Earth. You don't have to really worry about government data getting into the wrong hands. There are other ways to get data into your hands if you are interested in doing funny business. What is Bangalore has more than 200 layers of information available with various government silo agencies. A majority of them is with the, right now there is a master planning process going on in the city, and I know people in the master planning process who have access to 200 plus layers of information on the city, GIS layers, which are data friendly layers which can be mapped on top of each other for any reason, and they won't part with it to so-called ordinary citizens. It's this big brother attitude, like we know how to do, if we give it to you, you will mess it up kind of thing. No other city, I mean, most developed countries in the world, or even developing countries in the world, there is no such restriction on public data for public innovation. I don't know whether you know that it is actually a crime to have a printed map in India in your possession less than 1:5,000 in scale. In 1:5,000, you can hardly see anything. I mean, to plan a ward or a neighborhood, you need it in 1:1,000. And that you're not allowed to have access to. So I think a great thing like what you guys are doing in terms of opening up the, at least from an iSpirit point of view, opening up the financial sector to a much more open data platform. It's extraordinarily important to push the government now to say, let the data out, let it have a free run, give the data to whoever wants it. It doesn't, and of course with reasonable security considerations. Unless they do that, the idea of public participation in open data innovation is, particularly for city design, is never going to happen.
Thanks, Naresh. Any thoughts, Partha? Closing, we're coming close to the end of the hour, so any final closing
Sure.
thoughts?
The quick thing is, according to Jaijit, sort of put forward the thinking that led to where the government sort of approach to it. For example, the government thinks that it is being participated. In fact, it actually had some kind of a prize for the most participative um, smart city recently, where they put up a website and the number of people who visited the site and gave interactions and all of that stuff became metric for measuring participation. So, but the fundamental issue, I think one is yes, we need a lot more information, and this is again about technology. You can use it for democratizing a lot of information. And the question about a lot of the time citizens don't want to interact because the people they have to interact maybe a long way away. So let's say I'm sitting in Gurgaon at this point in time, and if the people who are going to be making decisions about Gurgaon from a public point of view, not that much is done here, would be the Huda offices and the administrators and the structures in Chandigarh. It's only in the capital cities of our country that there is the people have relatively easy access to the politicians who will actually make those, and the bureaucrats would actually make the kinds of decisions because they're in the state capital. Once you go out of the state capital, the local councillors and the local cooperative and the local government have relatively little control over the decisions that they would make. So the physical distance makes the engagement even more difficult in that sense. At the core of the issue is the fact that our city governments don't really determine too much of what happens in the lives of our citizens. And hence the citizen knows that fact and therefore has relatively withdrawn from engaging with the city government and self-provides what in Delhi, where we have done some extensive work that you'll see in a site called the Cities of Delhi, uh, there's been a gradual withdrawal where they're looking at water supply, we're looking at sanitation, and people try to self-provide a lot of these things because they're not relying on the state to provide things generally. And obviously, the broader decisions as to whether or not you're supposed to have a market, whether you're supposed to have what kind of facilities, where do you locate a bus stop, whether you locate a train station, things of that sort, seem to me to be quite far beyond what they can achieve. That said, in one instance, when livelihoods were really threatened, for example, when the Delhi master plan came out and wanted, and you had this big case in Delhi where the Supreme Court got after the people to where the ceiling drive and said that a huge amount of the commercial establishments of Delhi were illegal, were constructed in an unauthorized manner, etc., etc. And at that point in time, the traders of Delhi really got together, mobilized, and pushed back very hard. And finally, the law itself was changed. And finally, in starting from this master plan onwards, Delhi actually has mixed-use planning, which it didn't have before. And therefore, both the philosophy of planning was, to some extent, was affected, and the actual rules of planning were affected with political action. So that those instances, however, are few and far between, and therefore the day-to-day engagement. Let us say when Columbia University wanted to expand into Harlem, it was a very contested and a very tough engagement between the residents of Harlem and the city. agency, the kind of power, the kind of belief in themselves is not yet something that we have in our cities. Maybe, and a lot of people believe that it is not yet time, which I find somewhat disturbing.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we run out of time. It's top of the hour. Fascinating discussion. It's a massive topic. Too many areas to cover. We're not going to solve 100 cities problems in an hour, but I look forward to more sessions. And I think a lot of what we covered today was the what of the problem, and I think to a certain degree, touched upon the how, but there are lots of discussions about financial aspects, legal aspects, planning aspects, regulation, and where and how technology can really help and things like that. So I look forward to more sessions in the near future. So thank you all for your participation, Naresh, Partho, Jaijit, and happy holidays, happy new year, and we'll touch base again next year. Thank you all.